Welcome, everyone, to Chapter 2 Matter, Energy, and Life. Last week's lecture was meant to provide you with a surface level overview of environmental science to build a foundation as we start exploring the subject. And this week, we are going to continue to building that foundation, but in a different way. You may remember us mentioning last week that environmental science is an interdisciplinary science, meaning that it draws from many different scientific fields like biology, chemistry, and geology. And that means that in order to really understand how the environment works, we have to learn some basic fundamentals about these fields. And really, the field where it makes the most sense to start is chemistry, because chemistry principles are woven into so much of what we know about phenomena in the environment. In order to understand why the ocean is becoming more acidic and why that matters, you have to know a bit about chemistry. In order to understand why certain chemicals are poisoning living organisms and depleting biodiversity, we have to know a little bit about chemistry. So, if you are feeling intimidated by needing to learn some chemistry, I want you to take a deep breath and relax because we're going to move through this stuff slowly. We're going to keep things simple and basic. And by the end of this chapter, you will have the foundations that you need to go into our other chapters, ready to fully grasp the concepts that we're going to learn about. Here's a list of exactly what we're going to cover in this chapter. We're going to describe matter, meaning the stuff that the world as we know it is made of, and the chemical bonds that hold the matter together. We are going to look at a type of chemical reaction called redox reactions, which play an important role in certain environmental cycles that we will be learning about later. We will take a close look at one particular chemical, water, arguably the most important chemical in living organisms, which has special unique properties that make it able to support life. So we will look at those and what those properties are. We will also look at pH and the related concepts of acidity, basicity, and hydrogen ions. Then we'll move into a phase of the chapter focused on energy. We will explore different types of energy and metabolism, and we'll get an overview of the main processes that living things use to get energy: photosynthesis and cellular respiration. While we're on the topic of metabolism and energy, we will look at how food chains and food webs work, and how living things get energy in a food web and a food chain. Okay, so let's ease our way into that first objective by taking a look at matter. Matter is what the natural world is made of. It's defined as material that occupies space and has mass. Everything in nature is made of matter, including both living things and non living things. The basic unit that comprises matter is called atoms. Any object that exists, if you break it down into its smallest, ultra tiny pieces, those pieces are called atoms. As we will see in a moment, there are many different types of atoms, but they all share a basic structure. They have a central cluster of particles called the nucleus, and then one or more rings around the outside called orbitals that contain orbiting particles. You've seen probably a diagram of the solar system before with the planets revolving around the sun. That's not unlike the structure of the atom, where the sun is the nucleus and the orbits of the planets are like the orbitals of the atom. What you see on the screen is, of course, just a cartoon depiction, but in 2013, the first ever image of an atom was captured using an extremely powerful microscope. We can see the structure laid out with a central cluster of particles, the nucleus, and rings of orbiting particles. But what are those particles that are found within the atom? Well, we call them subatomic particles, and there are three of them. There's the protons, which have a positive electric charge and are found in the nucleus. Then the neutrons, which have no electric charge and are also found in the nucleus alongside the protons. And lastly, the electrons, which have a negative electric charge, and these are the ones that are orbiting in the orbitals. Another thing that is important to know about atoms is that there are many different types. The different types of atoms are called elements. So an element is a specific type of atom, and they are distinguished from each other by the number of protons in their nucleus. For example, atoms of the element carbon have 6 protons in their nucleus. If we're talking about nitrogen atoms, they have 7 protons in their nucleus. If we're talking about oxygen atoms, they have 8 protons in their nucleus. So this number of protons is what makes an element an element. Carbon is, by definition, an atom with 6 protons in its nucleus, and that never changes. Those 6 protons are what makes carbon carbon. All of these different variants of an atom with different numbers of protons are laid out in an organizational chart called the periodic table of elements. Each square is dedicated to one element. And in fact, if you look at the square for a particular element, there will be a whole number at the top. That corresponds to the number of protons in atoms of that element. So again, carbon has 6, nitrogen has 7, and oxygen has 8. So we now know that atoms are what makes up matter, and there are different types of atoms called elements. A final important idea to introduce before we close out this section is that atoms of most elements don't like to be solo. They like to associate with each other. When they do so, they form molecules. A molecule is a group of atoms held together in stable formation. The one that you see pictured here is a molecule made of one oxygen atom that is associating with 2 hydrogen atoms. In other words, H2O, or water. Water is made up of exactly 3 atoms. But in general, molecules can be made up of as little as 2 atoms, ranging all the way up to billions of atoms for large, complex molecules like DNA, for example. In the next section, we are going to look at the different ways that atoms come together to form molecules, so stay tuned.